Welcome to Bring on the Constitution. Today is week 2, and today we'll cover the overview of the Constitution, and we'll also cover the Constituent Assembly, its history and importance. Before we begin, some very quick housekeeping rules. Keep your video on if your bandwidth allows, because right now I'm seeing only sort of black squares. It'll be really nice to see all of those bright gleaming faces who've come here on a Wednesday to learn about the Constitution for 2 hours. So please switch on your videos if your bandwidth allows. Second, feel free to raise your hand and ask questions at any point. Otherwise, do drop them in the chat. To make the experience sort of meaningful for everybody, please keep your microphones off unless you're speaking. It's going to be a long session, hopefully not boring, but the sessions can be long, so feel free to take a bio break or go for a stretch at any point in time. And we try to weave in your life experiences or share from authentic self whenever discussions happen. And last but not least, have fun. I think the reason why personally I'm excited is because I would dread the Constitution classes when I was in school. So I'm hoping this session will be fun and hoping this will be start to many such fun sessions on the Constitution. So with that, I'll just pause on this screen. This is going to be today's session flow. We'll start with the overview and then look at the timeline of the Constitution making. We'll look at the historical context behind when the Constitution was drafted, and then we'll sort of shift gears and move into Nehru's objective resolutions. The same resolutions which later became the preamble, and Jaipal Singh and Ambedkar's response to it. Then we'll also touch upon the founding mothers who are not often too talked about, but were also a pivotal part of the formation of the Constitution. With that, we'll sort of wind up with the Constitution as it stands, the final version when it was promulgated, and we'll sort of end with a small group activity, some sharings, and a discussion in large group. So with that, I will just move right into the first part, which is going to be a video. Now, I hope you can hear the video. So some thumbs ups if you can show me. I'll just play it. Okay, you can hear the audio.
Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. A moment comes, which comes but rarely in history, when we step out from the old to the new, when an age ends, and when the soul of a nation, long suppressed, finds utterance. It is fitting we end today a period of ill fortune, and India discovers herself again. The achievement we celebrate today is but a step, an opening of opportunity to the greater triumphs and achievements that await us. Are we brave enough and wise enough to grasp this opportunity and accept the challenge of the future? Freedom and power bring responsibility. That responsibility rests upon this assembly, a sovereign body representing the sovereign people of India. Before the birth of freedom, we have endured all the pains of labor, and our hearts are heavy with the memory of this sorrow. Some of those pains continue even now. Nevertheless, the past is over, and it is the future that beckons to us now. That future is not one of ease or resting, but of incessant striving, so that we might fulfill the pledges we have so often taken, and the one we shall take today. The service of India means the service of the millions who suffer. It means the ending of poverty and ignorance and disease and inequality of opportunity. The ambition of the greatest man of our generation has been to wipe every tear from every eye. That may be beyond us, but so long as there are tears and suffering, so long our work will not be over. And so we have to labor and to work hard to give reality to our dreams. Those dreams are for India, but they are also for the world, for all the nations and peoples are too closely knit together today for any one of them to imagine that it can live apart. Peace has been said to be indivisible, so is freedom, so is prosperity now, and so also is disaster in this one world that can no longer be split into isolated fragments. To the people of India, whose representatives we are, we make appeal to join us with faith and confidence in this great adventure. This is no time for petty and destructive criticism, no time for ill will or blaming others. We have to build the noble mansion of free India where all her children may dwell.
Okay, I hope that was audible, or if not audible, visible to everybody. Now, before we move into the next section, take a pause and just reflect on what feelings and thoughts you were left with after you saw the video. Take a moment to reflect on that and put your comments in the chat. We'll pause for a couple of seconds and then move into the next session.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes, I said that now that you've seen the video, what thoughts and feelings come to you after you've seen it? Can you put them in the chat and then we can move on to the next session, next part. Taylor writes hopeful anticipation. Thanks for sharing. Can we have some more responses? Responsibility. Jacob writes inspirational and fresh start for the nation. Here writes curiosity. Feeling energetic. This moment of pride, increased feeling responsible towards the nation. Proud moment for us, anxiety, emotional, hope and courage. So keep writing in the chat, and with hope and courage, we move on to the next section where I'll hand it over to Sailana. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Sayantan. I think the reason why we started today's session with Nehru's speech, most of you may have already heard it, but nevertheless, every time I hear it, I feel the goosebumps, because when I think the entire session about the Constitution, I mean, leave alone the letter and the text and the words in the Constitution. I think what is really the running theme of the Constitution is the vision, the values, and the passion behind every word and the emotions behind every word. So, yes, cornerstone is the right word. And it is this feeling, I think, at the end of this 12-week session, if we are able to communicate even a fraction of the passion which was exhibited by the Constitution makers, I think we would have succeeded in our job, because it is easy for all of us to read the Constitution and make whatever sense of it and read the articles. But we started with this speech because what is important in today's session is the emotions behind the Constitution. And that is why we thought this would be the most apt beginning for the session. Can we have the slide? Now, since I am just giving you an overview of the Constitution. I don't know how many of you have actually seen the Constitution book. Have you? Anybody? Any thumbs up? You can put in the chat box if any of you have seen the Constitution, the entire book. Because generally, I think in our school and civics textbooks, beyond the fundamental rights chapter, which is, rendered in a very boring way, even law students, I mean, you'll be very surprised that there are many law students when they come to start practice, very few would have actually seen the entire Constitution book. And I think it's important for each one of you, maybe at the end of these classes, you'll all be curious enough to buy a Constitution. And I think we are actually sending each one of you a copy. Well, you may not be able to read it as a novel, but every time something comes up, I would suggest that you should go back to the Constitution and look it up, keep reading it, and every time in a different context, in a different timeline, you will find that it gives you a different and a fresh meaning and insight. And I'm just attempting here to give you a broad overview of what exactly the Constitution has so that you can make sense of it as and when you look at it. Now, here the picture before you is that of Mr. B.N. Rao. And he was the legal advisor to the Constituent Assembly, a very, very well-known jurist who was an expert on various constitutions of the world. And in fact, if you go back to the writings of that period, you will find that he compiled, the Constituent Assembly had a lot of subcommittees. Each one were given the task to put together the content with vis-a-vis fundamental rights, the minority rights, the administration part. So we had different assemblies who were subcommittees which were looking at it. And the task of putting together the entire content given by the various subcommittees and coming together with and putting together a draft constitution fell on Mr. B.N. Rao. And you would be surprised that he put through the entire text in less than a month. And this is the chapterization that we see today, the first draft. Of course, it had undergone many changes, but the way the Constitution is structured today, the credit goes to Mr. B.N. Rao. And these are the unsung heroes of the Constitution, which we thought like we'll take this occasion to introduce these historical personalities who have played a very big role, behind the scene roles in the drafting of the Constitution. The next, please. Now, this is to give you a broad overview of what the Constitution of India looked like in 1950 when it was first passed. It has undergone several changes, but it's made up, when the Constitution was first passed, it was made up of 22 parts, 395 articles. Now, very often what is the meaning of articles and sections? I think very often we hear this debate about whether articles is different, whether there's a reason why the term article is used instead of section, which is what you generally see when any law is enacted. Generally, I think the drafting protocol, or if you want to say that, article is used when we are giving an overarching, a rule or a broad principle, because the specifics would be in the statutes and where the sections would come, which would give you the nitty-gritties, the nuts and bolts. But the article will give you the broad parameters and the broad vision. And that is the distinction that is generally practiced in drafting of laws. So that's why the term article that is used in the Constitution, you will find that even in many of the UN conventions. Then there are 12 schedules to the Constitution. Again, the schedules give you again the breakup. I will explain a little later that. Then the subject of lawmaking were listed in the 7th schedule. So for instance, the main content of the Constitution, like for that the Constitution, what constitutes the territory of India? It will the details are given in the first schedule. What is the territory of there was the States Reorganization Act, in which now what constitutes the state of Tamil Nadu, what constitutes the state of Andhra Pradesh. Now we have seen the breaking up of larger, the bringing it together of new states. Now all this has happened in the reorganization, which is the foundation for it is the Constitution, which enables the government, the central government, to pass laws to decide on the formation of the states and the reorganization of the states and the territory which constitutes them. Now, the seventh schedule, these are the seventh schedule is being specifically mentioned here because I don't know how many of you have paid attention. Like we have what are called central laws and state laws. Now, that is the parliament makes laws. The state government, that is the assemblies of each states to which all of us belong to, they make their own laws. And then you have the concurrent list. So many of you may be wondering, now who decides on what subject matters, the central government can make laws, on what subject matter the state government can make laws. Now, this is what the Constitution tells you. In the seventh schedule to the Constitution, you have what is called List 1, which is the Union List, which has 97 entries. Now, these entries are nothing but subject matters. For instance, the defense of India. That will be one subject matter. So you may have something to do with health, labor, education, higher education. Now, this kind of subject matters are mentioned in each of these entries. So list 1 has 97 entries. At that time, it had 97 entries. That is called the Union List, which means the central government has the power to legislate in respect of the subject matter, which you find in the entries in the list 1. Similarly, list 2 is the state list, which has 66 entries at that relevant point in time. And it is the state assemblies which can pass laws with regard to the subject matters in those entries. Then the third list is what is called the concurrent list. Concurrent list generally means that both the union and the state government has the power to enact on those subject matters. And how this conflict, now what if the central government and the state government, legislate on the same subject matter? Now, how do you resolve it? Which would prevail over what? Now, these are the kind of details which you find in the body of the Constitution, which will tell you how to deal with contradictions where the same subject matter is dealt in both the legislations of the central and the state. So you have the concurrent list, which will which covers both the powers of the union and as well as the state. So this is broadly what the seventh schedule has. Next, Sayantan. Now the Constitution, as it stands today, it has been amended 106 times. In fact, Dr. Ambedkar explains when the Constitution was presented as to why the power to amend with a 2/3 majority was seen as the mean balance between countries where the Constitution was so rigid that each time, for instance, the US Constitution, where it was so rigid that it was so difficult to bring in amendment, and the latter constitutions which made it too easy. So Ambedkar said, we have learned from their experiences, and so we brought in an the power to amend. But we said it should be 2/3 majority. And a government which does not enjoy 2/3 majority, it means that it doesn't represent the majority of the will of the people, and so they cannot amend the Constitution. And so he said that it's a fine balance which they decided to maintain. So the last amendment, which if any of you have been following the regular news, has been the 106th Amendment, which brought in the Women's Reservation Act of 2023, which provided for 1/3 reservation of seats in parliament and state assemblies for women. And today we have about 470 articles and 25 parts to the Indian Constitution. Now, I'm not spending too much time on each part. We have just listed the key parts. Part 1, Union and its territories. So what constitutes what we call today India? So the opening sentence of the Constitution is, they say that India, that is Bharat. So this whole debate whether India and Bharat are one and the same, the Constitution itself uses this language. And in fact, it would be very interesting that Justice Krishna Iyer, in one of his judgments, Justice Krishna Iyer is one of the celebrated judges that the Indian Supreme Court has had. And he, in one of his judgments, refers to India is the urban, the modern and the elite India, and the rural India represents Bharat. So he very interestingly weaves in both these words, India and Bharat. And so part 1 of the Constitution deals with union and its territories. The schedule, deals with what constitutes the states, what are the territories in the Reorganization Act. So each of the schedules would relate to some portion of the Constitution. Part 2 deals with the citizenship. Now, we have had the controversy about the CAA, the citizenship, the amendments to the Citizenship Act, but the power to make these laws, you can trace it back to Part 2 of the Indian Constitution, which gives the mandate to the central government to make law with regard to the Constitution, to the citizenship of India. Part 3 is the fundamental rights. This is the most, I think, well-known chapter, which deals with the fundamental rights of equality, liberty, which we will deal with greater detail in the later sessions. Part 4 is the directive principles of state policy. Now, Part 3 and Part 4 are the most important as far as citizens are concerned, because this directly impacts each one of us in our everyday lives. And there has been a lot of debate about whether the directive principles are, they are not enforceable under law, and those kind of debates. We'll go into it when we are expanding on it, on the subject matter in the later sessions. Part 5 of the Constitution deals with the union, and Part 6 the states. So today what we know as the union government, central government, the president, the various authorities, the judiciary, which is the Supreme Court, the comptroller and auditor general. Now all these provisions you will find in Part 5. Part 6 is the state, so which is the state executive, the state legislature, the high courts, all that comes in the state. Then Part 9 and Part 9A, the panchayats and the municipalities. These are later amendments which were brought in, where the idea was that power should, go to the lower down. And so the Panchayati Raj, those were amendments which were brought in later into the Constitution. And then Part 11, which is the relation between the union and the states. So what is the kind of relation that should, what is the responsibility of the union to the states when there is a conflict? So these are all again spelled out in the Constitution of India. Then the emergency powers. So when we are looking at what are the situations in which the central government can, declare an emergency, whether it's an internal, external, financial. Yes, fundamental duties are also, I have not mentioned all the parts, because as we have pointed out, there are more than 24 parts. We have not gone into all that in detail, because you have what are the services under the state. For instance, now all of you are familiar with your Indian Administrative Service, the IFS, all these, the IAS, the IPS. So again, you can trace it back to the Constitution of India. Then the judiciary, the Finance Commission. So all these are part of the Constitution of India. So we are not going into all this in detail at this point in time for paucity of time. But the attempt is to tell you that whatever laws are enacted today, whatever debates that you see in your newspaper on a daily basis, you can always relate it back to some part of the Constitution or trace the origins to the parts of the Constitution. The next slide, Sayantan. Yeah. So now with this, I'll hand it over to Suresh, who will take you through the timeline of drafting the Constitution.
Thanks, Saila. Welcome, everybody. Like Saila was saying, it's very easy to understand the Constitution as a set of people who sat together and wrote it up in the Constituent Assembly. Our history teachers, our books, our universities don't tell us the pathos which went behind the Constitution making. That there was a live context in which people were getting slaughtered. There was massive type of conflicts on caste, on community, on tribe, on various other things. And that it is arising from this larger context of conflict that also gave rise to a cry for peace and a cry for unity. It is in this context that we need to understand the Constitution, because many of the things that we are going through today, you can actually trace it back to debates that took place in the Constituent Assembly. Whether you're talking about secularism, you're talking about socialism, whether you're talking about property rights, you're talking about a whole lot of other rights, including minority rights, language rights, gender rights. many of these things have been debated, and it's sort of deja vu today when you come back and see what is happening today was actually debated then, and warnings were given at an earlier point in time. So this timeline will show you that it started out. I mean, there's never a correct timeline, but this is some important events that we put together. Also limited by the size of the slide. This Gandhiji's declaration 1922 is extremely important, where he said that it is not a gift of the British. It is a declaration of our full self-expression of our independence. I think that laid the basis of the fact that later on got formulated that it is something that we have got it, we have given it, and the constitution makers gave it to us. The question that is before all of us is, what are we going to do with this constitution that has been given to us? We go straight away into 46, end of the Second World War. People like Hansa Mehta, one of the constitution mothers, was participating in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights drafting process, left an indelible imprint on the constitution. Okay. Now, it is at that time that in 1946, before partition, when the Constituent Assembly of Undivided India was set up on the 6th of December, 2 days from now, it's actually 75 plus 3 years more, that we had the formation of the Constituent Assembly. Nehru presents on the 13th of December, within 1 week of setting up the Constituent Assembly, the objective resolution, which Arvind will take us through in greater detail. This later becomes the preamble of the Constitution, which we all know about. Some of us have read, but we will read in greater detail in the coming days. Okay, the objective resolution of Pandit was adopted. Now it went through a debate. Now this is another myth that has been created, that a few people discussed it and a few people pushed it through. Actually, when you see the history, it's not true. It went through so many iterations, so much discussion. It went back and forth between the Constituent Assembly and the people of India, in terms of the people of India at that time who could participate. And people from all across the country have participated, sending in memorandum, sending in their comments, sending in their opposition to various aspects of the Constitution. So this was adopted by the Constituent Assembly on 22nd January 1947. India Independence Act, Declaration of Independence, we all know. The draft Constitution was circulated on the 21st of February 1948. So between this period, 2 years, it took 1.5 years, it took, like Saila was saying, B.N. Rao was one of the greatest constitution drafters, very less recognized by our history books. Actually, Ambedkar, on the day when he presented the final draft of the constitution, talks in the assembly about the role of B.N. Rao. He says it is basically his steering of the constitution drafting, that a lot of the credit should go to him as also to members of the drafting committee. So the draft constitution was circulated, comments were invited from throughout India, and hundreds of comments did pour in. We will be sharing some of the articles which talks about how people, ordinary people, women, farmers, fishing community people, tribal people and other people actually wrote back to the Constituent Assembly. There's some figure I'll show you in the next few slides. Constituent Assembly passes it on the 26th of November, and finally the Constitution came into effect on 26th of January. The Constituent Assembly had its last meeting on the 24th of January 1950. I'm highlighting this for one issue. This was a Constituent Assembly which had the template of creating the law of the country. So the Constitution is something that is given to us by our forefathers in terms of our rights as being born as citizens in this land. There is a parallel to this in terms of the Constituent Assembly that took part in that was there in Jammu and Kashmir, that issue that went to the Supreme Court again. Okay, so we'll keep this in mind, that the Constituent Assembly last hearing was on the 24th of Jan, and finally it came into effect on the Republic Day. In the next slide, we will then see some core elements. Now, in what context was 1946 the Constituent Assembly constituted, and what was the situation in which they were doing? They were discussing or arguing. It is not as though they are sitting back, in a context of peace and it's intellectual discussion amongst them. This was in a very, very heightened context of strife, of conflict, of difficulties, of contending groups fighting with each other. Okay, now imagine the context today. The reports which talks about how inequality has spread much more in India now than it was in British India times. Okay. Now, also some posts have been coming recently about the per capita income of India. If you remove out Ambani and Adani, if you remove out the 5% of the rich, It comes down to a very, very low figure, which is equal to sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, you might have read some of these posts that have been going around for the last 2 days. That's a position today. Look at the type of problems today. During my physical workshop, I ask people, can we list out all the problems that we have in India today? And one board is never enough to talk about the type of problems, including the latest problem of the Mandal Masjid temple type of a conflict in one area, and various types of conflicts in different parts. But let's go back to 47. The population of India was 340 million, and we are 140 million today. Okay, so our population has increased threefold now. Okay, literacy rate was 12%. Women's literacy rate was 9% at that time. Poverty was 80%. 250 million people were poor. Life expectancy was 32. It was abysmal. It was supposed to be one of the lowest in the world at that period. Okay, we're including Africa into all of this. IMR was 146 per 1 lakh births. Maternal mortality was 2,000. Impossible to imagine. 2,000 mothers for every 1 lakh deliveries were dying. Okay. Now the MMR at the national level has come down to 103. Some of the southern states it's come down to 20, 15, 25, less than 30. Okay. That's the effect of the 75 years. But what happened in that period was crushing poverty, the grinding inequality, abysmal literacy rate, poor life expectancy, inadequate infrastructure. Okay, this is the socio-economic context in which you have to locate the framers of the Constitution, who had before them this very difficult task of making sure that all the people who are represented in the slide are not left out, that their rights are taken care of, that the state is enjoined in a certain way not to forget the plight of these people. Okay. So as the next slide will show, okay, there was chaos in that period. Okay. Now, if you remember, at the time of partition, when more than 1 million people were killed, Hindus and Muslims in that period, across the borders, there were clashes, communal clashes all across India. There was a lot of bloodshed. So in a way, the Constitution has been written on the blood of many people who actually gave their lives for this dream that is India. Okay. The Indian princely states were divided. Some of them were wanting to choose Pakistan, some wanting to do in India. Some were also talking about getting into an alliance with foreign states. So it is not an easy situation when the constitution makers sat down to write the constitution. Okay, there was entrenched inequality and legitimized discrimination. There were landlords and big farmers who were part of the struggle. Okay, who had bonded laborers, who had Dalits, who were not seen to have any freedom or any rights altogether. Okay, and they did not even look at them as human beings. That was the time. So when you're talking about farmers and farmers' rights at that period, what do you talk about? Who's going to talk about the voiceless, the marginalized people at that time, and talk about safeguarding their rights? These are all issues. For example, issues of untouchability or bonded labor are major issues in 1947. They are issues today in 2024. Can imagine what it must have been 78 years earlier. Okay. Now, election rights was given only to owners of property, graduates, and income taxpayers. Women in many parts were not given vote. Okay. Now, it is in this context, you had this ongoing thing, demand that Pakistan has become a Muslim country. What about India, which is majority Hindus? That we should therefore adopt a Hindu majority state or a Hindu Rashtra. That was a plea at that time, at that time. And it was in this context that the discussions in the parliament, in the Constituent Assembly, talked about very clearly, should we become a Hindu state or should we become a secular state? If it is secular, what type of secularism are we talking about? There was debate about, is this secularism European secularism? Or is it secularism an idea which is adapted and adopted for India? These discussions are there, the rich discussions that took place there. Discussions we are going through today were already debated, and a very categorical answer that they said, no, we don't want to become a theocratic state. Our idea of secularism is different. Our idea of democracy is different. And this shall be the way in which we'll put into the constitution the future imprint of how India should be. Now, into this, bringing one more angle, backward classes were at ferment. Tribes and tribal areas were at ferment. All of these things had to be resolved in the space of 2 years, in which they sat down to write the Constitution of India. Now you can imagine each group is fighting with each other in terms of their own rights and protecting their own interests. How do you come together as a nation of 340 million people at that period, not having any of the technology that we have today? You can then understand the context in which these people sat through. As the next slide will then show, okay, it was in this context, that the Constitution came. They had to address the aspirations, the demands, and the requirements of diverse communities. You had people coming from the caste system who denied Dalits any type of rights. They were not even seen as human beings. Lower castes were not even given any rights. Okay. Then you had also amongst the religious groups, various religious groups, which denied rights to the other groups in terms of their existence. Okay. It is in this context, they had to think of a principle which would apply equally to as many people as possible, or as a template which will bring all people together with the singular cry that we should come together to be a united India. So rule of law, what would rule of law in a Varnashama Dharma context mean? What will rule of law in a, say, an Islamic or a Sikh or a Buddhist or other things mean? Should it be there or not? Principles of equality, dignity and fraternity are very, very important thing. In a society which is so divided on caste, gender, and various other lines, dignity and fraternity, without that, you really don't have people coming together. In fact, Ambedkar also talks about it in the last speech he gave in the Constituent Assembly. Okay, but it is in this context when they drafted the first draft, and it was circulated throughout the nation, and hundreds and thousands of people wrote. Okay, they wrote with their own views about what is right and what is not right. They wrote about their rights vis-a-vis other people. All of that was put together. Okay, as we shall now see in the next slide, what the constitution makers were actually doing was to distill from this very, very humongously complex problem a dream of India. It was a dream of a future India. Now, can you imagine what it would have meant in 1949, 47 to 49? Women were not allowed to vote. Women were seen to be properties or people under control of their menfolk in the house, the husband, the father, the son. Women were not thought of as somebody to whom education should be given. Equally in terms of Dalits, equally in terms of other caste groups. Okay. Now, it is in this context, it took a tremendous amount of courage on the part of the constitution makers, who unanimously on many of these things came together to say, that may be an India in 49, but we hope that that will not be the India of the future. And our dream is a dream of a different India. They had the courage to dream. And they had the courage to leave behind us a gift, which is an heritage to us. The question that comes up before all of us is, therefore, what are we going to do with that heritage? Are we doing enough, each one of us who is part of this Kudam now? I introduced the Kudam last time. We're all part of the Kudam now. Are each one of us, do we have a responsibility to safeguard this very, very delicate baby, if you may call that, which has been gifted to us? So 389 members originally in the Constituent Assembly became 299 members after partition. They could have easily derailed the whole Constituent Assembly. They said no. They went ahead. Okay. Now 7,635 amendments were proposed to the Constitution. 2,473 were accepted. This breaks the lie that there was no discussion, people were not participating in it. Maybe people may not have participated enough, but it will be very wrong, historically wrong, to say that they did not participate at all. And the entire thing was done in a period of 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days. This is there in the speech of Ambedkar, which we have circulated to you. It is in this context that we have to locate the Constitution and the dream of the Constitution makers, who in the preamble, therefore, we said, we the people of India give to ourselves. They didn't write, this is the preamble. That is a resounding, there's a history behind it, which we shall look at in the next part. As we shall then go into into the second part of it. Santhan, can you move to the next one? Okay. We will then move from here to actually looking at what Ambedkar talked about in 1946, okay, which is a salutary reminder to us of the difficulties that faced then and the fact that there are enough obstacles in our way to derail us. But he gives a call to us saying, despite the prejudices, despite the division, despite our differences, we need to come together so that we are in a path of unity in terms of ourselves as a nation. Our nation is never complete, a nation is not ideal, but it's something that we all work towards. So we will just hear what Ambedkar had said, and then after that, we'll move to Arvind, who will take us through the other parts of the constitution making process.
So far as the ultimate goal is concerned, I think none of us need have any apprehensions. None of us need have any doubt. But my fear, which I must express clearly, is this. Our difficulty, as I said, is not about the ultimate future. Our difficulty is how to make the heterogeneous mess that we have today take a decision in common and march in a cooperative way on that road which is bound to lead us to unity. Our difficulty is not with regard to the ultimate. Our difficulty is with regard to the beginning. Mr. Chairman, therefore, I should have thought that in order to make a start, in order to induce every party, every section in this country, it would be the act of greatest statesmanship for the majority party even to make a concession to the prejudices of people who are not prepared to march together. And it is for that I propose to make this appeal. Let us leave aside slogans. Let us leave aside words which frighten people. Let us even make concession to the prejudices of our opponents. Bring them in so that they may willingly join with us on marching upon that road, which, as I said, if we walk long enough, must necessarily lead us to unity.
We'll stop here. The very powerful words of Ambedkar, despite our prejudices, we have to bring everybody together so that we march on the long path towards unity and progress. This is the history behind it. And I'd like to end up by saying this history we need to understand as a history on which on one side you had conflict, you had chaos. On the other side, you had people who had the courage to dream. We are called upon by history today in 2024 when we are all sitting together to say, what are we going to do in terms of leaving our imprint on history? That was the starting point for this series. And we hope that you'll all come together. And by the end of the series, we hope that you also will have the same spark which Ambedkar talked about, that we take people, irrespective of our differences, together. From here, I will now invite Arvind to share with us his larger body of work on Nehru's resolution and what in the response of Jaspal Singh, Ambedkar, and a few others. Over to you, Arvind.
Thanks, Suresh. Thanks, Saila. I think so far you'll have got a sense, in a sense, of the broad kind of the nature of the document called the Constitution. You also got some sense of the historical context from which the document emerged. And I think one point maybe to keep in mind is, what do we mean by the Constitution compared to a law? What is the difference between a constitution and a law? And I think that's essentially why we're here, because we're not here to study a particular law, as it were, but we're here to study or to understand the Constitution. And one way of thinking of the Constitution, of course, I mean, the question you can ask is, why is it so long, right? And one part of it, as Saila took us through that in some detail, is clearly the institutional frameworks we set up, right? How to divide powers from the center to the state. What are the responsibilities of the executive? What responsibilities of the legislature? Responsibilities of the judiciary? What is the difference between the High Court and the Supreme Court? What civics textbook should have told you, and is what the Constitution tells you, right? And that's broad. If you want to broadly, that's what you call a governance, right? The institutions of governance. It's a kind of Constitution is a governance text, and part of the length of the Constitution is because of the details of the nature of governance. Saila took it through that, right? I mean, you need to know if a law, if the if a central government, for example, giving let's take an example. Central government frames a law on the question of the powers of the police. For example, say limiting or increasing the powers of the police. Can the central government frame such a law? Right? To answer the question, uh, we can say I have an opinion, you have an opinion, but if you're thinking from the point of view of the constitution, say, okay, let me go back. Styla mentioned seventh schedule. Let me go back to the seventh schedule. Let me see, where does the word law and order come? Does it come in the central list? Does it come in the state list? Does it come in the concurrent list? That gives you the answer, right? So it's in one sense, I mean, of course, there are many nuances around this, but in one sense, it's a fairly direct response. It's a fairly direct answer. You just, as Senthil rightly said, you in the state list. So you it's okay. Maybe I'll give you one contemporary answer on this, right? Uh, I don't know if you'll follow the papers, but the Delhi police, right, landed up in Bangalore a couple of days ago. And what was their objective? Their objective was to uh, their language is persuade, but I think our language, of course, is arrest. Is to arrest Nadeem Khan, as you rightly indicated, and take him to Delhi, right? And what is the constitutional question you look at in this case? The question you'll ask yourself is: law and order is a state subject. Why is the Delhi police landing up in Karnataka? Are there any protocols by which the Delhi police interact with the Karnataka police? Can they just come, take somebody from here and go off to Delhi like that, or are there procedures which govern this, right? And that's a constitutional question, right? The constitution lays down, right, the procedure through which the interaction between law and order between the two states take place. Of course, in this case, simple point: when the Delhi police come, the Delhi police is is constituted in the Delhi Police Act, but the power which constitutes is the Delhi police are responsible, because Delhi is a very unique situation, to the Home Minister. So in essence, it's a federal question, right, between the center and the state. But just to indicate that there's a lot to be said, right, on the governance dimension of the text of the constitution. And that's something which, again, we can't, of course, get into all the nuances and the details, but just to indicate that use the constitution. Again, when the reference point which Saila was making, like a novel, she's right? You don't take the constitution and say start from word one and go into the last word. And it's not possible, right? You have a problem, you look at that, think of the structure which is laid down, look at the table of contents of the constitution, look at the way everything is divided, and then go to the section that you want, right? And that's the essential technique you have to figure out. Essential thing you have to figure out is how to use this text, right, to get to the answers that you want, not by reading word one to word the last word, as it were, but to see how to enter, right, how to enter the text, as it were, to answer the problem that you have. One question you got, of course, center, state, and concurrent list 7, and you go down to the schedule 7 and go down to the 3 list. That's one kind of a framework you learn to utilize. In a similar way, that be many parts of the constitution you have to learn to get into. But that's one part of it. The idea of the constitution is a governance text, right? But I think the reason you all are here, I hope you'll get to the governance text, because obviously you can see the connection of the governance text to the justice concerns, right? Again, this is very important, because sometimes we think, fundamental rights as necessarily a grand statement, but sometimes it may be more a technical point, right? It may be a technical point of the division of powers and what is the responsibility of the central government vis-a-vis the state government. So even if you're interested in protecting rights, you might need to know the governance dimension of the text of the constitution, or how the powers are divided, etc. It might be very integral and very important for you to know, right? So sometimes a lot of the work of fighting for justice, fighting for rights, happens in these spaces where you're trying to understand the nuances and the technicalities and the differences between the powers of the center and the powers of the state. So just keep that in mind as well. And when you're thinking of even the question, broader question of justice. But the point I want to make is this, right? And we think of the Constitution, I think of the Constitution as at least two dimensions coming together. It is the governance text and the justice text, right? The two come together, right? And when you refer to the justice text, to me, the key dimensions of the Constitution one really needs to think about is Tyler again already spoke about it, but the key dimensions of the Constitution you need to think about. You need to think of the preamble, right? You have to think of the fundamental rights chapter. You think of the directive principles of state policy and think of the fundamental duties, right? These are the four dimensions, four parts of the Constitution you have to go to think in terms of the justice text as well. And see the difference between a institution, the governance text and the justice text is the justice texts have a certain concreteness in terms of the way the language of the provisions of the fundamental rights chapter or the directive principles are worded, but they also have a certain abstractness because they embody the broader sense of values which you're interested in. So it's always sometimes a little more difficult to grasp because you're trying to find something more. Trying to find what is the abstractness or what is the abstract, what is the concrete embodiment of an abstract value, and which means get back to the question: what are the abstract values on which the Constitution is based? Right, and in a sense, I mean that's the heart of the preamble. The heart of the preamble is dealing with the question of these abstract values, which we think are integral to the to our collective vision. Again, see when you say constitutions, right? I mean, uh, you don't think of them merely as what you call documents of governance. They're also frameworks within which you imagine the possibilities of collective life, right? I mean, let's go with the language again. The frameworks within which you imagine the possibilities of collective life, right? And why this is so integral or so important is it gives you that key to thinking of what is the way we envisage a collective life. So let's took it again through a range of challenges which we face, the range of complicated scenarios in which the Constitution was born, etc. And in that context, what is the sense? How did the framers or the founders imagine the possibilities of a collective life, right? What do you mean by collective life? What are the ways a collective life can be structured? How can the Constitution structure a collective life? Here are again two dimensions to keep in mind, two very important dimensions actually. One is when you say collective life, one of course is the question of the relationship between the center, the relationship, so not center, relationship between the state and the individual. That's a framework of your collective life, right? And think of a range of ways this will become important, right? What is the what is your framework of your collective life? It's the question of the relationship between the individual and the state. So if, for example, if the individual has no rights, the framework of your collective life is you're living in an authoritarian state. If you're living in a where the state decides to control or the state controls what you eat, who you choose to love, where you choose to reside, if every decision you take the opinion of the state or you take the consent of the state, then it's a you could I'll take it one step further. It's not just an authoritarian state; it's a totalitarian state where the state aims at total control over every aspect of your life, right? And if you say a democratic state, it's premised on the idea of again what the preamble talks about, the idea of liberty, right? The idea of freedom, right? Fundamentally, the idea of your collective life or the way you respond to your relationship to the state is that uh, the state in this framework concedes or the state recognizes that what is absolutely vital is that you have the sense of freedom to make choices about things in your personal intimate life. Maybe the question of who you choose to marry, maybe the question of which religion you choose to follow, maybe the question of what artwork you choose to exhibit, all of that becomes a part of your liberty, as it were, right? And that's something the state guarantees it will protect. Again, see, you think of this again links back to the Constitution, right? The value, again, you go back to the preamble. If you say the value, the preamble talks of liberty. Again, each of these is very important: liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, right? So liberty is the very core idea. The core idea in terms of the idea that freedom, right? You must have the freedom to take forward your life the way you see fit, right? And so that's again that idea of liberty and freedom is very integral to the imagination of our collective life, right? And so again, when you say we live in a democracy, that's what we mean. We don't mean only, right, that you have the right to elect a government once in every 5 years. Of course, you do. But you also mean that you have the freedom to take forward aspects of your own life without interference from the state, right? And again, see the point, of course, is none of these ideas make sense without the question of breathing life into these ideas, without thinking of these ideas in a larger, uh, in terms of the founders, in terms of what are the vision that they had, and how do you take these ideas forward. And here, maybe on the question of liberty or freedom, right? I want to reference a somebody who we reference all the time, but we don't think of him in the context of an advocate of liberty or freedom, which is Mahatma Gandhi, right? And the reason I say that again is you go back. We'll talk about this maybe at some future point in some greater detail as well, right? You go back to the entire question of the what is called the Great Sedition Trial. Let's give you a very quick couple of words on this, which is again, what is the colonial state, right? The colonial state was an authoritarian state. Where authoritarian state meant that you ask any question challenging the government, you are shut down, right? You're shut down. How are you shut down? You're shut down firstly by the state intimidating you, secondly by the state putting you in a sense of fear, and thirdly by the state instrumentalizing the criminal law to shut your opinion down, right? And okay, this links up to again when you think of an authoritarian state, right? A very important dimension of authoritarian state is spread a sense of fear, right? A fear that what if I do something, I could get arrested. I could get arrested. So it's best maybe to just keep quiet. And again, this is a very, very beautiful part in actually discovery of India where Nehru refers to Gandhi. Nehru, of course, is that he's not religious in his thinking or his outlook. Gandhi, of course, deeply religious in his thinking and outlook. So what is Nehru's understanding of Gandhi? He put something very well. He says that, see, the great contribution of Gandhiji is he taught us to be fearless. Till that time, the colonial state imposed a sense of fear on us by always, right, coming down on us with a ton of bricks. But what Gandhi taught us is to be fearless. That whatever happens, you have to take your courage in your hands and you have to fight back. And he says that's the crucial quality which he, which he, which Gandhi taught us, right? And so, give you an example of this fearlessness in the context of a quote, and again in the context of the quote COURT, and which gives you a sense of Gandhi's, shall we say, contribution to the idea of liberty of freedom, which is the main point actually I want to make over here. When you think of liberty, think of liberty in the context of Gandhi. That's my only point, right? And I'll give you this is the example. That is, we had the colonial law and sedition, which criminalized what is called uh, exciting disaffection against the government established by law. Right? And again, it's very interesting, quaint English language, which is exciting. What is sedition? Sedition is an offense of exciting disaffection against the government established by law. So you'll think of the underlying thematic is that you have to have an affection for the government. If you don't have an affection, you're uh, you you're uh, you're committing a criminal offense, right? And so what Gandhi did is publish a range of articles which are deeply critical, right? I think we shared it in the first class, deeply critical of the colonial state, and basically uh, enjoined upon people the duty to sedition. I think Suresh shared this in the first slide. Enjoined upon people the duty to sedition. The British government, of course, never want to take it lying down. So they filed a case of sedition against Gandhi and took him and charged him in court. Right? And the many details of that case, again, we will share that. Actually, it's only 3 pages, right? And my plea to you all is in the course of these classes, you read the original documents, right? You read the original documents and see how we can utilize it in the arguments that you may make in, in taking in taking in taking your work forward, right? And one of the original documents is the sedition trial. It's a great document in many dimensions, but here I'm just going to make only one point, right? Uh, Gandhi's response to the sedition law, he says it's the prince among the political provisions of the Indian Penal Code designed to suppress the liberty of the individual. If one has affection cannot be manufactured or regulated by law. If one has no affection, one must be allowed to express that lack of affection as long as one does not uh, instigate violence. Right? That's the way he frames it. Right? And so again, you read that and say, it is so interesting when you think of the entire question of of the question of of how the the question of freedom of speech and expression is actually very integral to a Gandhian perspective or Gandhian viewpoint. And just we'll circulate the trial document, just 3 pages, and everybody must read it. Right? You're concerned with sedition. Here you hear the father of the nation telling you why sedition is a bad law. So I think we should all read it, and we should be able to utilize that. Most importantly, in the course of our argumentation with family members, with in public representations, etc., you have to bring this document in, right? And that's really the point. Again, see, the point about the Constitution is it's a tool which you can utilize in your argumentation. And this is one example which I'm giving you of how you can utilize the words of Gandhi to take forward the idea of liberty, which underlies the framework of the Indian Constitution. But yeah, leave that aside for now. And so the you keep this point in mind of the of one dimension, right? I mean, we just I've only made one point till now that when we think of a collective life, one dimension of a collective life is the relationship between the state and the individual, and the fact that the individual must have utmost freedom to express themselves is something which is communicated in of course, in the preamble of the Indian Constitution. And one of the forerunners of the line of thinking is Gandhi with his articulation of the against the sedition law, as it were. So you keep that as one kind of a frame or a way of thinking of the entire question of liberty. The second dimension of collective life, again, it's very important to understand, is also what is the relationship, not just between the state and the individual, but between the individual and the individual, right? And you heard Dr. Ambedkar and in the clip played by Suresh, where he made the point that unity is a path we need to walk towards, and we walk long enough, we will reach unity. Right? That's what he says. So what is he saying? Actually, we're not united at this current moment. When he says what we're not united, what does he mean? That he means that Indian society is what you call graded and hierarchical. Again, we've talked about the metaphor of the caste system as being a kind of a ladder, right? Each level has a level below and a level above, as it were. And that's the nature of Indian society, right? If Indian society is graded on a hierarchical basis, there's somebody above, somebody below, when it comes to the question of caste, then
Talked about Nehru's thing.
then what is the relationship between? Sorry, Suresh, you said something.
No.
Then what is the relationship between the uh, what is the relationship between individual and individual, right? As far as the Constitution is concerned, how does the Constitution envisage the relationship between people, between two individuals? And then again, that's a part of your collective life, right? What are the parts of the Constitution which reference this dimension, as it were, right? And if you look at again, look at both these dimensions, right? Both the relationship of the individual with the state and the individual with the individual, and what do we find in the Constitution which allows us to think of these two relationships, as it were, right? And one, of course, is the entire question of of the of limiting, in a sense, the power of the state, and the second is of promoting, again going back to the Constitution, the promoting, in a sense, the value of fraternity, and how do you ensure that people can interact across lines on a basis of caste, on lines of equality. And these are the two, if you want to think of it as broad kind of frameworks or ways of understanding the Constitution as a justice text. Justice between individuals inter se, and justice in terms of the relationship between the center between the state and the individual. So let us see, based on this background, let's try and look at the one, right? If you think of the justice text and the governance text, we have to go back, in a sense, to which I said, the preamble, which is the heart of both the justice, which is the heart of the entire question of the putting down the values, as it were. So the precursor of the preamble is the objective resolution moved by Nehru, right? And let's just share that objective resolution and see what sense we make of it.
We have circulated to everybody the objectives resolution.
Can you see the? Can you see it?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. Okay. Just to give you maybe one other background point, right, of the objectives resolution, and then we'll come to this. When we think of the objectives resolution, right, we have these 6 big volumes called the Constituent Assembly debates, right? And the Constituent Assembly debate begins with the objectives resolution. Nehru initially moves the objectives resolution, and then there's a debate which happens on on the objectives resolution which Nehru moves. So the starting point, really, of the entire discussion on the Constituent Assembly is the objectives resolution, right? And again, look at you can look at the text once I place it before you. You'll get a sense of, again, there's a strongly, you'd call it what you call a legal component, and there's a way in which the legal component is sought to be explained, and that's again the way the Constituent Assembly is, right? You have a provision, right, and the provision will be stated in basic terms, and the provision will sort of be explained, right? And Nehru explains, in a sense, the objective resolution which he moves, right? And so that you see, again, what you pay attention to is how does he interpret the objective resolution, right? And here I'm going to just place it before you guys. Maybe somebody just read it, please. Read the entire objective resolution. I beg to move from I beg to move.
I beg to move this Constituent Assembly declares its firm and solemn resolve to proclaim India as an independent sovereign republic and to draw up for a future governance a constitution, wherein the territories that now comprise British India, the territories that now form the Indian states, and such other parts of India as are outside British India, and the states as well as other territories as are willing to be constituted into the independent sovereign India, shall be a union of them all. And wherein the said territories, whether with the present boundaries or with such other as may be determined by the Constituent Assembly, and thereafter, according to the law of the Constitution, shall possess and retain the status of autonomous units, together with residual powers, and exercise all powers and functions of government and administration, save and except such powers and functions as are vested in or assigned to the Union. or as are inherent or implied in the union or resulting therefrom, and wherein all power and authority of the sovereign independent India, its constituent parts and organs of government are derived from people, and wherein shall be guaranteed and secured to all the people of India's justice, social, economic, and political equality of status, of opportunity before the law, freedom of thought, expression, belief, faith, worship, vocation, association, and action, subject to law and public morality, and wherein adequate safeguards shall be provided for minorities, backward and tribal areas, and depressed and other backward classes, and whereby shall be maintained the integrity of the territory of the Republic and its sovereign rights on land, sea, and air, according to justice and the law of civilized nations. And this ancient land attains its rightful and honored place in the world and make its full and willing contribution to the promotion of world peace and the welfare of mankind.
Thanks. See, you read this again, right? There are, again, possibly you can think of it as in a Baker's response. You see that you can see two parts to it. One what he calls controversial, one what he calls non-controversial, not controversial. Look at that a little later. But see, some of this is of historical, not of historical significance, in the sense it's not deeply relevant today, right? It was based on the fact that, at that moment in time, the objective was of the Constituent Assembly was to preserve India as a united entity, that is, including what is today Pakistan and Bangladesh, was to be a part of India, right? So because of that, there's a way in which there was the division of powers. The governance part was in the governance text of it was envisaged very, very differently at that moment in time, right? And the point which becomes relevant to us and it becomes a part later, of course, is points 5 and 6, right? Which is wherein shall be guaranteed and secured to all the people of India justice, social, economic, and political. Again, you look at the preamble language, it's similar, right? Justice, social, economic, and political is there. Equality of status and of opportunity and before the law. Again, you look at the preamble, you'll see the question of equality being there. Freedom of thought, expression, belief, faith, worship, vocation, association, and action subject to law and public morality, and wherein adequate safeguards shall be provided for minorities, backwards, and tribal areas, and repressed and other backward classes. Right? Maybe I just also share while we're at it. Keep this in mind, right? Keep this in mind, and let's look at the entire question of the language of the preamble itself now. Can you see the preamble? Yeah.
No, we can't see.
Okay, I'm going to just share it again then. Yeah. Maybe somebody can read the preamble now.
Can anyone read the preamble?
I'm reading. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution.
Yeah, thank you. So again, see, you get a sense of the kernel of the Constitution being there in terms of the objectives resolution, right? And a closer look, have a closer look at the language of the two, and you see how, for example, the language of the objective resolution evolves into the language of the preamble. If you look more closely, right, and this is something I'm just going to point out to, and I'll leave it to you to look at a little later, right? Uh, you'll find that the word fraternity is not mentioned in the objectives resolution. The word dignity again is not mentioned in the objectives resolution. Right? So there's a way in which the objectives resolution has a kernel or as a kind of a core, as it were, which is built on to finally become the preamble. And this point I mentioned before, but I think again, just to reiterate the point, if you want to get the understanding of why the word fraternity is there and why the word dignity is there, you read Akash Singh Ratho's book called Baker's Preamble, which traces out how words fraternity and dignity from the objectives resolution, uh, which doesn't have it, become a part of the preamble. What is Ambedkar's contribution to ensuring these two words are there? And importantly, and equally, and very importantly, why was he so insistent that the word fraternity be there in the Indian Constitution, in the preamble to the Indian Constitution, and why was he so insistent? Why was he so insistent that the word dignity be there in the Indian Constitution? Right, and so these again points to think about, right? I mean, so uh, the point being again that every word in the preamble has a deep meaning underlying it, and reading it closely gives you a sense of the meaning which with which the provision is imbued or is has. And maybe just a couple more points we'll make on this question of fraternity and dignity, so that you get a sense, right, of both of them. Uh, when the draft constitution is presented, Ambedkar appends a note to it saying that I have added the word fraternity. Liberty and equality is there in the original doc in the objectives resolution, but fraternity is not there. I've added the word fraternity, and the reason he wants fraternity there, go back to the speech which we played a little earlier, which is the idea that we're not yet a united nation. So his thinking, his understanding, his fraternity will be the bridge to build that sense of a unity. So unless you have the aspiration or the goal of fraternity, you will not be able to build that sense of a unity. That's the point which he makes, right? The other point over here is the dignity question, right? Uh, what do you mean by dignity? Why should dignity be there in the preamble to the Indian Constitution? Is the other important dimension, right? And again, if you go back to Ambedkar's writing, you'll get a sense that why dignity is important. We have shared this again in the last class, in the last session, where you think of a humiliation based on caste, right? And humiliation based on caste is not an economic phenomena alone. It's to do with, in Ambedkar's words, it's about the confiscation of the title deeds of your humanity, right? It's about the confiscation of the title deeds of your humanity, right? So there's a way in which you're not seen as a human being, right? And when you put in dignity in a central sense, you're saying that the main purpose or the reason we have a constitution is to ensure that you protect the dignity of the individual, right? And here again, Suresh referenced B.N. Rao, right? What is B.N. Rao's contribution to the debate on dignity and this clause, right? I mentioned this before, but I think with the text before you, it'll be a lot. It'll make a lot more sense. Is if you look at the language, right? Dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation, right? I think PC Tandon only. He made a proposal. Can we turn the language around? Let it be fraternity assuring the unity of the nation and the dignity of the individual. Just turn it around, right? And the Vietnam's response to that is, firstly, of course, he says that we borrowed the language from the Irish Constitution. The Irish Constitution put dignity of the individual first and unity of the nation later. But the Second point he makes is that unless you protect the dignity of the individual, you cannot safeguard the unity of the nation, right? So there's a interesting, again, almost a philosophical argument of what takes precedence, right? If you want to preserve the unity of the nation, you must, if you want to ensure unity of the nation, you must preserve the dignity of the individual. It's not just the priority in terms of wording, it's also a kind of a philosophical priority or a centering of the notion of dignity of the individual before on which the unity of the nation is is premised. Again, going back to the idea of the notion of the collective life, right? But what is the imagination of the collective life the Constitution puts forward? The imagination of the collective life is that you first and foremost safeguard and protect the dignity of the individual. It's that is the heart, or that is the basis on which the unity of the nation will be safeguarded. Again, see, at the range of debates you can think of, right? Where people say, oh, the unity of the nation is under threat. And so your response to that, when people say unity of the nation is under threat, your response to that is the way the Constitution imagines it, the way you protect the unity of the nation is by ensuring that you assure the dignity of the individual. Once you assure the dignity of the individual, you ensure that every individual has a stake in the continuation of the nation, right? So once you ensure that the individual is stake in the nation, then it's easier, or the idea of protecting the unity of the nation will come naturally to people. If you're not protecting the dignity and you're saying that you want to protect the unity of the nation, it's a tougher call to make, right? So the Constitution must give you the promise that you will protect, you will ensure the protection of the dignity of the individual, right? And so that's the point I want to make with respect to one part of the language of Nehru. Let's look at the again. Let's go back again to the to the objectives resolution, right? So okay, so you what we have looked at till now is this language, right? Is the language, and you're saying that actually it's a much deeper, right? Deeper understanding of what these stand for, because they're abstract values, right? And you understand these abstract values as a way in which we relate to each other as people, and the way in which the state relates to us. That's the core point which you really want to understand through point 5 and point 6 of the objectives resolution. And I think I'm only mirroring or articulating what Nehru says in terms of his understanding of how do you read the objectives resolution, right? And so perhaps uh, maybe somebody can just read from the from we yeah from maybe read the whole paragraph. I just read the whole paragraph. So
Sir,
Okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
this is the
Anybody
fifth.
wants to read, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, this is the fifth day of this first session of the Constituent Assembly. Thus far, we have labored on certain provisional and procedural matters which are essential. We have a clear field to work upon. We have to prepare the ground, and we have been doing that these few days. We have still much to do. We have to pass our rules of procedure and to appoint committees and the like before we can proceed to the real step, to the real work of the Constituent Assembly, that is, the high adventure of giving shape in the printed and written word to a nation's dream and aspiration. But even now, at this stage, it is surely desirable that we should give some identification to ourselves, to those who look to this assembly, to those millions in this country who are looking up to us and to the world at large, as to what we may do, what we seek to achieve, whither we are going. It is with this purpose that I have placed this resolution before this House. It is a resolution, and yet it is something much more than a resolution. It is a declaration. It is a firm resolve. It is a pledge and an undertaking, and it is for all of us, I hope a dedication. And I wish this House, if I may say so respectfully, should consider this resolution.
Yeah, what?
The Honorable Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, not in a spirit of narrow legal wording, but rather to look at the spirit behind that resolution. Words are magic things often enough, but even the magic of words sometimes cannot convey the magic of the human spirit and of a nation's passion. And so I cannot say that this resolution at all conveys the passion that lies in the hearts and the minds of the Indian people today. It seeks very feebly to tell the world of what we have thought or dreamt of so long and what we now hope to achieve in the near future. It is in that spirit that I venture to place this resolution before the House, and it is in that spirit that I trust the House will receive it and ultimately pass it.
Yeah, fine. Okay, so we don't have much time, but the point you get is very clear, right? You're saying that you think of the resolution not in a narrow legal wording, but it's spirit behind the resolution, and that's the spirit which Nehru invokes, and spirit which we've been trying to communicate in the last uh, last time period as it were. And maybe one last point I'll make on this, and before you think that these are all abstract and not very useful kind of a debate, is the Delhi High Court judgment in Nas Foundation, which decriminalized same-sex relationships, cited this part of the objectives resolution, saying that words are magic things often enough, but even the magic of words cannot sometimes communicate the magic of the human spirit. And what the court was trying to say is the spirit underlying the resolution, the way the court understood it, is the spirit of inclusivity and spirit of equality. Right? And so they read the objectives resolution, right, to invoke the spirit underlying the constitution. Right? And so again you get a sense of how this is why I made you read this, right? Is people can utilize this document in different ways, and we hope that you'll be able to utilize it in different ways, right? And in terms of maybe courtroom advocacy, maybe outside courtroom advocacy, etc. Right? I'm not going to go further into objective resolution, but say this broadly put, right? The there's a the objective resolution is moved, and the range of people respond to it. There's a lot of response which is broadly, right, deeply appreciative of Nehru moving the objective resolution. I just want to read two responses to that. One is by Ambedkar, and second is by Jaipal Singh. Right? Let's look at Ambedkar's response to the resolution.
Do you want me to share it with? I also have it open.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. And by the way, when the speech that you saw, the speech that you heard, right, of Ambedkar's response to the objective resolution, the latter part of the response, right? But here I want to take you to maybe an earlier part of the of his response to the objectives resolution, right? And compared to everybody's moving praise and saying, "Oh, it's brilliant," we think Nehru's captured something very important. The Ambedkar expresses a certain sense of a disappointment, right? And just read that from here. I must confess. Somebody can read it from here.
I must confess that coming as a resolution thus from Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who is reputed to be a socialist, the resolution, although non-controversial, is to my mind
Yeah, go on.
very disappointing. I should have expected him to go much further than he has done in the part of the resolution. As a student of history, I should have preferred this part of the resolution not being embodied in it at all. When one reads that part of the resolution, it reminds one of the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which was pronounced by the French Constituent Assembly. I think I am right in suggesting that after the lapse of practicality 450 years, the Declaration of Rights of the Man and the principles which are embodied in it has become part and parcel of our mental makeup. I say they have become not only the part and parcel of the mental makeup of modern man in every civilized part of the world, but also in our own country, which is so orthodox, so archaic in its thought and its social structure. Hardly anyone can be found to deny its validity. To repeat it now as the resolution does is to say the feast pure pedantry. These principles have become the silent, immaculate premise of our outlook. It is therefore unnecessary to proclaim as forming a part of a creed.
It's gone.
These fundamental rights set out are set out are made subject to law and morality. Obviously, what is law, what is morality will be determined by the executive of the day, and when the executive may take one view and another executive may take another view. And we do not know what exactly would be the position with regard to fundamental rights if this matter is left to the executive of the day.
Yeah. Okay. So of course, there's a lot to be talked about over here, but I'm just going to make only a couple of points, right? One first question is you read this part, right? You read this part of Ambedkar's critique of Nehru. My reading is Ambedkar's critique of Nehru saying you're not going far enough. You claim, right? You claim to be a socialist, and you produce this banal, boring, uh, I'm just paraphrasing, right? Uh, resolution, which everybody agrees with. And what is his point, right? He says that this the principles that are embodied in it, in Nehru's objective resolution, has become part and parcel of a mental makeup. I have said it become not only part and parcel of the mental makeup of modern man, every civilized part of the world, but also in our own country, which is so orthodox, so archaic in its thought and its social structure, hardly anybody can be found to deny its validity. To repeat it now, as the resolution does, is pure pedantry. These principles become part of the silent, immaculate premise of outlook. Is therefore unnecessary to proclaim as forming part of a creed. Right? Again, this I thought was very, very interesting because actually, right, you read this resolution today with today's lens, right? You read Ambedkar's response to Nehru's resolution. Actually, you'll find my reading. You'll find they're on the same page. Both Nehru and Ambedkar are very clear that these rights are so fundamental that they become, in Ambedkar's words, they can become part and parcel of a mental makeup that even in a country which is so archaic in its social structure, nobody can be found to deny its validity, right? So again, going back, right? What is he referring to, right? He's referring to the liberty of thought expression, belief, faith, worship. He's referring to the idea of equality of status and opportunity, right? He's referring to these ideas and saying that they're so fundamental, so basic, and so much has happened in the world post the French Revolution that nobody is going to deny these ideas, right? So interestingly enough, to me, right, there's a unity as far as Nehru and Ambedkar are concerned on the question of the what he calls the what Ambedkar calls the non-controversial part of the objective of the resolution. It's simple. Everybody agrees. What's the big deal? Is broadly his submission or his point. The other point he makes again, which is very, very interesting, he says the question of what is law and what is morality. Right? Again, this might be worth thinking about, right? Using this quotation or using this speech by Dr. Ambedkar, where the if you go back. I mean, I'm not going to go back now. If you go back to the language of the objectives resolution, right? It says it talks about the liberties and says subject to law and morality, right? And his criticism is how can you subject your liberties to law and morality? Because what is law and morality depends upon the government of the day, right? And so again, if you notice the preamble doesn't have the language subject to law and morality after this particular intervention. But of course, we can look at Article 19 and look at the range of limitations, and you can see how these limitations are very much still there, right? In terms of the text of the Constitution, so they're not there in the preamble, as it were. So this is roughly, very simply, put one kind of a response by Ambedkar. And the final response I want to take you through is the response by Jaipal Singh. Yeah. Can you see the Jaipal Singh document? or I'll do that again. Okay, anyway, so we've looked at the response by Baker, and now I want to take you briefly through the response by Jaipal Singh, right? Who is Jaipal Singh and why are we referencing Jaipal Singh at all, right? And a quick little bit of background on Jaipal Singh. Jaipal Singh is I think, one of the most interesting members of the Constituent Assembly, and please read up a little more closely on Jaipal Singh. He is Jaipal Singh Munda, obviously from Jharkhand, what is now Jharkhand, right? And uh, he he as a young man is taken to Oxford or taken to England, where he studies in England by a priest who takes him there, right? And when he's studying there, he's playing hockey in Oxford, etc. And midway through his studies, uh, he gets an offer he's told to come and not represent, since he's playing in the Oxford Blues, he's playing hockey. He's asked to captain the Indian hockey team, right? So he captains the Indian hockey team when they play in Amsterdam, and they go on to win the gold medal. Dayan Chand, actually, who some of you all may know, plays under him, right? And so this is a really interesting character. Again, Jaipal Singh, very very interesting character, who lands back in India, had established something called the Adivasi Party, and becomes a member of the Constituent Assembly, right? And this man we're talking about the question of representation, right? You go back to Ambedkar. Ambedkar says, again, it's very, very interesting. In his speech, he says, in his concluding speech, again, we hope we get a chance to read both the opening speech where he introduces the Constitution and the concluding speech when he summarizes the features of the Constitution. He says, when I initially entered the Constituent Assembly, he said, I had no larger ambitions to represent the interests of my people till I was called to the task of being the chairperson of the drafting committee, right? And so he moves, right, from a person who represents a particular community to representing the widest possible community, which is in this case India, right? And that's the movement which Ambedkar makes. But Jaipal Singh, it's again really, really fascinating. You read any response to Jaipal Singh in the Constituent Assembly is imbued or comes from the space of representing the Adivasi people. Right? So it's again a very, very powerful kind of a act of representation of the interests of the Adivasi people, which you find in Jaipal Singh's speech. But again, the many nuances around this, because again, Adivasi society has many kinds of divisions, as it were. If you go to the Jharkhand region, people, I think, will make the point that he belongs around Munda community and the other communities as well. And other communities may not fully see themselves represented by Jaipal Singh. And there's, of course, another big question, which is that if the Dalits have a representation in terms of Dr. Ambedkar, uh, who's the figure who best represents the interests of the Adivasi people, right? And within the Constituent Assembly, arguably, the figure is Jaipal Singh, arguably again, right? And there will be many contestations, many different opinions on this. But I say he represents because he's able to take forward a little bit of what the concerns of the Adivasi people are. So we'll look a little bit again, finally, at Jaipal Singh's speech, uh, response to the objectives resolution, right? And again, it's a very powerful, very brilliant response, which everybody must read. But anyway, now please somebody said read it now.
I'll read this one.
Yes.
Just looking for it on the. Okay.
Is it there? I mean, is it showing on my screen?
Sir, if there's any group of Indian people that has been shabbily treated, it is my people. Resolution is not going to teach Adivasis democracy. You cannot teach democracy to the tribal people. You have to learn.
No, read the whole thing. Sorry, just read the whole speech.
Okay. Okay, from the beginning.
Yes,
Mr. Chairman, sir, I rise to speak on behalf of millions of unknown hordes, yet very important, of unrecognized warriors of freedom, the original people of India who have variously been known as backward tribes, primitive tribes, criminal tribes, and everything else. Sir, I'm proud to be a Jungli. That is the name by which we are known in my part of the country. Living as we do in the jungles, we know what it means to support this resolution. On behalf of more than 30 millions of the Adivasis, I support it. Not merely because it may have been sponsored by a leader of the Indian National Congress. I support it because it is a resolution which gives expression to sentiments that throb in every heart in this country. I have no quarrel with the wording of this resolution at all. As a Jungli, as an Adivasi, I am not expected to understand the legal intricacies of the resolution. But my common sense tells me, the common sense of my people tells me, that every one of us should march in that road of freedom and fight together. Sir, if there is any group of Indian people that has been shabbily treated, it is my people. They have been disgracefully treated, neglected for the last 6,000 years. The history of the Indus Valley civilization, a child of which I am, shows quite clearly that it is the newcomers. Most of you here are intruders as far as I am concerned. It is the newcomers who have driven away my people from the Indus Valley to the jungle fastnesses. This resolution is not going to teach Adivasis democracy. You cannot teach democracy to the tribal people. You have to learn democratic ways from them. They are the most democratic people on earth. What my people require, sir, is not adequate safeguards as Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru has put it. They require protection from ministers. That is the position today. We do not ask for any special protection. We want to be treated like every other Indian. There is the problem of Hindustan. There is the problem of Pakistan. There is the problem of Adivasis. If we all shout in different militant directions, feel in different ways, we shall end up in Kabristan. The whole history of my people is one of continuous exploitation and dispossession by the non-aboriginals of India, punctuated by rebellions and disorders, and yet I take Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru at his word. I take you all at your word that now we are going to start a new chapter of independent India, where there is equality of opportunity, where no one would be neglected. There is no question of caste in my society. We're all equal. Have we not been casually treated by the cabinet mission? More than 30 million people completely ignored? It is only a matter of political widow dressing that we today find 6 tribal members in this Constituent Assembly. How is it? What has the Indian National Congress done for our fair representation? Is there going to be any provision in the rules whereby it may be possible to bring in more Adivasis? And by Adivasis, I mean, sir, not only men, but women also? There are too many men in the Constituent Assembly. We want more women of the type of Mrs. Vijayalakshmi Pandit, who has already won a victory in America by destroying this racialism. My people have been suffering for 6,000 years because of your racialism of the Hindus and everybody else. Sir, there is an advisory committee. My people, the Adivasis, they are also Indians and they're deeply concerned about what is going to happen about the selection to the advisory committee. When I was first given a copy of the memorandum, as first submitted by the Cabinet Mission in section 20 of the language, read as follows. The Advisory Committee on the Rights of Citizens.
That's fine. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So thank you for that very passionate reading of Jayapal Singh's speech. I think you captured a little bit of the passion, right, which underlies the way Jayapal Singh expressed himself. Again, there's so much, right, so much to discuss as far as this speech itself is concerned, right? One, of course, is the question of time, right? When you think of India, right? What are the time frame within which you think of the country, right? And here Jayapal Singh is saying that you think in terms of 5,000 years, right? You go back to the Indus Valley civilization, you go back to the question of the original inhabitants, right, of the country. That's the first point he's making, right? The other point he's making is that it's almost, shall we say, a conditional kind of an acceptance, where he's saying that we've been dealt with shabbily for the last 6,000 years, right? So what have you done that you have to give us that there is hope that we will be dealt with properly from now on, right? Is that? And of course, the reference point here seems to be Nehru and the fact that we go right with the fact that what Pandit Nehru is saying. Then of course he's making the point that we're not beggars at the table, as it were, right? Adivasis come and we have a lot to teach you. Forget you teaching us. We have a lot to teach you. Democracy is something we will teach you. You don't need to teach us about democracy, right? That's I think fantastically. You get a sense of the passion and the power with which he's able to express that particular viewpoint. And of course, and the point he's making is you think of the history of the Adivasis, you think of it under the exploitation and dispossession, punctuated by rebellions and disorder. Right, again, so it's such a again powerful and important point, right? And here again you have to think back. Okay, fine, Jaipal Singh was there at the original point of the Indian Constitution. What are the provisions which entered the Constitution through Jaipal Singh? Right? Is it something like we think of the fifth schedule again? The silent reference to schedules. If you think of the Indian Constitution from the point of view of the Adivasi people, right? Do we think? Do we think? And there's a point again for you all to consider. The fifth schedule and the sixth schedule should form the heart of interpreting the constitution from the Adivasi perspective. Right? Is there ways in which you think differently about what the constitution means from the perspective of the Adivasi people? Right? And there's a range of very, very important questions which are thrown up by Jaipal Singh's speech. Right? I think I'm going to stop with that. There's a lot more one can say right on each of these speeches, but I'll stop with that. And Suresh, how do we want to take this forward now? We have 12 minutes, I think. Sorry. Yeah.
I think you just ask people to respond.
Sure.
Questions, views, observations.
Sure.
That was brilliant, Arvind. Thank you. And I don't know who read that last part, the Jaipal Singh. It's very moving, very powerful.
Brilliantly read. Nilo, right?
I think it was Tilo, yes.
Tilo, yeah, super.
Yeah, so we have another 12 minutes. Session is open for anybody.
Any thoughts, comments, suggestions?
There are some questions in the chat. I'll read them out, but just pausing if there's any new questions that come up in light of the recent discussions.
Well, one question I have actually for people, I'm sure there are people who work on Adivasi rights in this group, right? So the question which I have is, if you think of Jaipal Singh, saying that we've been through a horrible history, but I take Pandit Nehru at his word, right? So to assess that statement by Jaipal Singh today, right? How do we assess it? So what has been done as far as Adivasi people are concerned since 1950, and what are the bigger failures which have happened since 1950? Is anybody working on Adivasi rights in a group over here? Maybe that's too intense a question.
No.
So Suresh, you should answer because
yeah, I mean, in fact,
Pradeep and the work with Pradeep, right? There's a lot you have to say on this point. Actually, I look forward to hearing what you have to say on it.
But I think let's get people to talk. I did work among the Adivasis in Maharashtra for about 7-8 years. I was a full-time activist. But yeah, there'll be occasions for me to talk. But the floor is open. Like I said, we follow the principles of the Kodam. No thought is too small. No question is too silly to be taken up and discussed here. So inviting everybody to share your thoughts. Please feel free to come. What are the thoughts you had in the last almost 1 hour and 50 minutes of presentations from the three of us?
Also, I'm pretty sure nobody could possibly sleep through that powerful presentation by Arvind, but it'll still be nice to see all of you awaken with the videos on if possible.
Yeah. Any thoughts provoked in you? Any questions in your mind?
So I'll just ask here.
I have actually put it in the chat as well. About this public morality, there is this sentence that I don't remember the exact one, but in the end, this public morality comes, and I somewhere feel it dilutes the whole sentence. Like, it is a very good big sentence or phrase, but in the end, when this public morality comes again, there is an issue of how do we interpret that. I'm not able to recollect the exact sentence. Uh,
Yeah.
so then,
I'll
define.
respond.
Arvind, can we have several
So we can do
observations?
that. We can do that. Done. Done.
Yeah. So what is public morality is what Abhishek is saying. Okay. Shaivya, would you like to read out what you have written, Shaivya?
Hey, hi. So, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so, I mean, I'm working in a tribal area, and in my workplace and I don't know, conversations around development in general, it's a lot of conversation around um, Dalit rights and Dalit education and all of that. But I think tribal identities, we are still, in search of tribal identity, and we're still trying to understand tribal education. So whenever the topic of constitution came up, my general understanding was that there was nobody to fight for tribal rights. There was a lot of conversation around Dalit right, but not as much around tribal rights. So this I don't know, response by Jaipal Singh Munda was really eye-opening. And I just want to know more about, what happened afterwards. What was the conversation around tribal rights when the constitution was being drafted? Yeah, that's all.
Thanks. Some questions we can come back. We just take it as observations now. Vinay, you had something to say? Go ahead, Vinay.
You're on mute.
We should say, while Vinay is trying to get his mic on, Vinay is running a wonderful program on the Constitution, reclaiming the Constitution. It's something that's worth all of you to visit.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Vinay.
Thanks. Yeah. So, as much as I started, reading the Constituent Assembly debates, again, thanks to Arvind and team from post CA agitation 2019. One thing I think, the very first day of the formation of the Constitution, when the objective resolution is moved, we are talking gender equality. I think anywhere in the world for that period, this is a revolutionary thought. It didn't occur to me that response was actually made to the objective resolution, the Jaipal Singh Munda. So where he's talking about women, as much as Hansa Mehta's speech and her contribution to Universal Declaration of Human Rights is neglected, or rather unknown, I think this particular part of Jaipal Singh Munda needs to be celebrated, especially his indication that there are no women here, and it's even so relevant today, 75 years later.
That we needed the 106th Amendment, which they have said they will implement later, not now.
Yes. But nevertheless, the fact that day one of the Constitution we started off like this and compare it to what was happening around the world, that the fact that it's, and today I think we need more Instagram reels and celebrating, making that one sentence the biggest thing ever, and sort of that kind of outcomes are needed today. Dire need for that to to blow it out of proportion. However shameless it may sound, I think that's the need of the hour.
Thanks, Vinay.
Vinay, it was intersectionality of women is talking about Adivasi women being inside.
Yes, that too. But since Jaipal Singh Munda is often equated to the leader of Adivasis, but here he's talking women
Generally.
also. Gender, the gender, the intersectionality, definitely. But I think that gender aspect definitely needs to be spoken about.
Can you have another 3 or 4 responses?
Yeah, the Arvind's explanation about how the constitution was structured towards collective life, that was more insightful about rights individuals between individuals and the state between individuals. The core idea of liberty, that was very insightful.
Thanks, Nanda.
My question to Arvind, sir.
Yeah.
You have said that B. N. Rao contributed to the part dignity of individual will precede the unity of nation. It is referring to the Irish Constitution. So I have one curious question: whether the entire objective resolution had it been inspired from any of the constitutions, or it's the original script of Nehru, or Mahatma Gandhi contributed anything to this particular part? Because usually some important resolutions, they will go and give it to Gandhi and they will take his inputs, like the resolution of Kashmir. When it goes to UN, Gandhi said, okay, he has given some corrections like that. So is it inspired from any of the constitution or original script of Jawaharlal Nehru? One question. The second question is, now we say this preamble, directive principles, fundamental rights, fundamental duty, and we are upholding it against fascism. But one strange thing is, in the Vijayadashami speech, Mohan Bhagwat also said that we'll have to take this preamble, fundamental rights, fundamental duties, and directive principles to every citizens of this country. So he is also telling the same thing. So how come it is possible we are telling that? And there is another thing, you may come up with some, Subramani Swami say this constitution itself is a constitution for Hindu Rashtra. Only thing we have to bring in UCC. We can interpret this as Hindu Rashtra, like importance to Sanskrit, and he is referring few articles, and he say this itself is that only thing we have to bring UCC. In one interview he said some couple of years before. So how come this contradictory people of contradictory interest, they are upholding this preamble?
That's quite a bundle of questions, Andrew, but nice, very good question. Okay, yeah.
I have one small question.
Yeah.
When objective resolution was presented in the Constituent Assembly, it was objection was raised by Mr. Jayakar.
Yeah.
And it was not liked by Congress people. But same objections were raised by Ambedkar also. They were taken in some different spirit. But ultimately, Jayakar has to resign from Constituent Assembly. So and secondly, though the question is later, it will come later on. We have some fundamental duties are there and rights are there. In duties, having a rational character, development of rationality, rational character is a duty. But religion sometimes say, no, we have to, whatever religion says, you can't question. So that's the contradiction is there. Religion sometimes supports orthodoxy. Religious texts, they support orthodoxy. But rationality and religious belief, they contradict each other. And sometimes people get FIRs lodged against them for speaking on rational lines.
Yeah, Arvind, actually, I'm handling a case now. Tomorrow it's coming up where a rationalist was killed by some other people who felt very offended by what he said. So I'm appearing in a case like that. So it's constantly happening, Mr. Anand. I think. So Arvind, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Let's try and quickly respond. I mean, we see this as an invitation to a conversation, of course. We won't be able to respond in fully to all the great questions you asked, but keep it in mind. And we'll come back to a lot of the questions that you've asked, right? The first question on public morality, I think the Ambedkar reference, which is very important to keep in mind, is public morality and constitutional morality. Objective resolution makes, of course, the point that, law and morality are determined by the government of the day. But Ambedkar later on comes up with the notion or references the notion called constitutional morality, by which he says democracy in India is a top dressing in a soil which is essentially undemocratic. Constitutional morality is not natural sentiment. Our people are yet to learn it. It has to be cultivated. I'm going a little quickly, but I think you get the quick sense of it, and then we can read it a little more closely later. So, broadly, his point is that public morality should be subject to constitutional morality. What is constitutional morality? Again, we can interpret that as saying a morality which is rooted in the text of the Constitution. Again, what we referenced right now, constitutional morality has to rely on protecting or defending the right to liberty. Equality has to be integral to constitutional morality. Fraternity has to be integral to constitutional morality. So we can think of how you interpret that, but that's broadly put one answer to that question. The question of the Adivasi identity, and is there other reference points? I'd put together all the references. I mean, again, the Shandan, you can share that constitution.net, which has a kind of very good archive of the Constitutional Assembly. So you type in Jaipal Singh, right? Or type in tribal or Adivasi, you'll get every reference in the Constitutional Assembly on these questions. And Jaipal Singh responds to a range of concerns coming from the Adivasi perspective. We don't have time to go into that, but I mentioned in the first class, but right from the question of, the question of prohibition, the question of flags, he has a response coming from the Adivasi perspective. So that's totally Shaina, right? Totally worth reading. So please read more closely on that question. The question of gender, again, very important. The fact that Jaipal Singh referenced gender and built that connection between the two, but that I take that point well. The question of the objectives, what the question of Mohan Bhagwat referencing the preamble. See, I don't think we should get scared. My own opinion on if somebody references the Constitution of the preamble. What you have to figure out is the question of what is the Constitution you want to defend and take forward, right? So Mohan Bhagwat can reference the Constitution, but you go back and see what is the Constitution he's referencing, right? And you take forward your understanding of the Constitution, saying that no, my understanding of the Constitution is that liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship is integral, right? For example, that's clearly in the preamble, as it were. So does that maybe match, not match with Mohan Bhagwat? Is a different question, but you have to be clear on what is the Constitution you defend. You don't give up on the Constitution because Mohan Bhagwat is referencing it. You challenge his interpretation of it based on your interpretation as it were. And is the Constitution a document for Hindu Rashtra? Again, see, there's a great piece on this dimension by Tarunab Kaitan, and he kind of makes the case that we have to understand the directive principles as a place in which ideological conflict is actually sought to be contained, not resolved, but contained, right? Because Constituent Assembly, right, has people from the right, has people from the left, has people from the center, and yet we all agreed together on the text of the Constitution. So where are the right viewpoints in the Constitution? Tarunab's point is the right viewpoints are sought to be contained in the directive principles, right? If you look at the cow slaughter provision, it doesn't say prohibition cow slaughter, it puts it within the framework of broader protection of milch cattle, right? And that's one place where you find it. Similarly, socialist provisions are sort of be contained within the framework of the directive principles. So you can find a reference point to almost any ideology in the text of the Constitution. But the point is, what is the overall ideology of the Constitution? Not necessarily what one particular provision says. Right? You have to find this again, Nehru's words, the spirit underlying the Constitution.
Okay, we will continue the conversation. This is just the first class. We have 11 more sessions that we will talk to. Please do write in that group that we have, the WhatsApp group, questions, observations, views, comments, criticisms, ideas, suggestions, etc. Yeah, so we can continue the conversation. It's what we would like to share with you all is, obviously, we are all very excited about this class. Is also about continuing to have the constitutional discussion with all of you. because we think that every time we discuss, some new nuance comes, some new idea comes. To that extent, we are protecting, promoting, and expanding the constitutional in terms of its reality in India today. Okay, so let's continue this discussion. Please feel free to write comments. If there are any questions that you may have, you can. I've already written to you all. Please do get in touch with us, and we will see to what extent we can help you out. Saila, any last words?
No, I think, first thought which came to me when we were going through all these texts is that all the, the spirit which that we should all try to take everyone together, then the, the tribal situation and the, the exploitation, and despite that still placing faith in the majority that somehow we will, I think every single bit of it is still relevant for today's situation and context. So I think, that is something that we all have to bear in mind, that our task that, is still unfinished. We all have to put in, our constitution makers have done their bit. I think now the rest is left to us to continue that task. So I think that is what we need to keep in mind as we are going through this. It's not just an academic exercise, but it is something for all of us to live by, to live with and work for whatever has been set forth and articulated by the various people in the constitution.
Actually, I have to give thanks to Mr. Arvind Narayan. Earlier, I had read many times, couple of occasions, but no clarity was there. So today, after attending this lecture, I got the clarity on issues covered today.
Thank you, Mr. Anand. I think that's the spirit with which we're going forward.
Yes.
See, the constitution makers had every reason to be cynical, had every reason to think that change cannot take place because the factual condition was like that. But yet they dared to dream. They dared to dream, like what Arvind had said, about individual rights, about collective rights. They also talked about what it is to be in a nation. I think we need to keep that, on one hand, the spirit, on the other hand, also a very clear, logical understanding of the power of a constitution and its principles. Okay, so we will have to wind up now. We would like to finish up in time. Please, like I said again, this is just the beginning. We will be sharing the readings with you all. Like I have written to you all in the last week, twice I've written. Please do read the readings. We have taken a lot of effort to put together the readings. If you don't read the material that we are sending it to you, it will be a little difficult for you to follow what's going to be talked about. Any ideas, suggestions on how to improve on what you would like to do, please continue to send it to us. To the extent that it's possible to fix it within the 2-hour class, we will try to incorporate it. Yeah.